Drivers ready? Watch the light.
When you go to rebuild the shocks on your drag car, one of the things you're going to want to change is the oil in the shocks. So 60 weight oil being in the front, when you come to brake, hit the brakes on the car to slow down at the end of a run, it's going to help you from dragging the front end on the ground as the shocks compress because of the fact that you're hitting the brake.
It also helps slow down the weight transfer to the rear when the car launches.
Factory team 80 weight for the rear end of the car. As you start to make adjustments in your car via pinion, spur gear, what's going to happen is the car is going to get a lot faster and the shocks are going to start compressing a lot harder as you're putting more power down to the rear wheels. And what that's going to do with the 80 weight oil is it's going to help with the dampening of the spring where it's going to slow it down so that way you will not ride the wheelie bar. As we continue to adjust the shocks on the DR10, Team Associated offers a variety of springs with different spring rates to them, which are going to help you in the process of upgrading the power to your car. It's going to help you to be more consistent and help you continue to put more power down and keep the car a lot more accurate as we stiffen up the dampening on these shocks. Some of the things that are going to be needed in the rebuild of these shocks on the DR10 is going to be your shock oil. We're using factory team oils. We also going to need the O-rings, which come in the shock rebuild kit. Part number for that is 91491. We opted to upgrade our X-rings, the actually little O-rings that go inside the shocks, from the original rubber ones to the X-rings, which are silicone. And we are going to need some green slime, which is part number 1105, which is going to help us lube all the seals and to make everything get put together a lot easier and to make sure that we do not roll any of our X-rings. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and remove the spring cup and your spring. After you do that, I actually use a set of pliers, and if you look at my set of pliers, they got an area that has no grooves on the jaw. What I do is I grab the shock shaft down by the cup, and reason being is you do not want to put any pliers that have teeth on them on the shaft, because what will happen is as your shaft goes in and out of the shock, what it's going to do is it's going to tear up your X-ring and you're going to start to get a leak in them. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. I'm going to go ahead and take this off. We're going to go ahead and remove the cap. I have a spray can cap, and I'm going to go ahead and dump my oil out here. And we're going to go ahead and take this out of here and put it on our towel so it can get dried. And one of the things you're going to want to do is come back and remove the lower cap, which holds all your O-rings and your shims in. You see the old O-ring right here, we're going to be replacing that O-ring, and the O-rings on the inside, and there's actually a couple of shims, as you're going to see as I pull it out right now. Here's one, two, followed by another O-ring, and there should be one more in here, and that's the one that's the beveled piece. We're going to remove the O-ring and the cap O-ring, and those are all going to be replaced. We're going to go ahead and proceed to rebuild this shock. We're going to use our factory team rebuild X-ring rebuild kit, part number 91495. This is with the silicone X-rings. We're going to go ahead and start to put our shocks back together. I'm going to go ahead and open up the green slime we're going to be using. It's a factory team part number 1105. And we're going to use this just to go ahead and lubricate our X rings as we get them put in, and our spacers. So one of the things before we get started I want to show you is we got two different styles of spacers. One spacer has a beveled edge on it, and if you can see that beveled edge goes facing the shock body. Let's go ahead and put that one in first really quick so you can see. I'm going to place this in here. And in doing so, I'm going to get a little bit of grease and get one of our X-rings, rub it into the X-ring to lubricate it. We're going to go ahead and place that into our bottom of our shock body, followed by the other spacer, which is a lot thicker and just perfectly squared. That one will go in next. And then we're going to go ahead and top it with a little more grease on another X-ring. And this is important to do so that way when you put the shaft in, you will not roll any of the X-rings. We're going to go ahead and put our O-ring for the cap, so that way when you screw the cap on, it does not leak. I'll go ahead and use some of the grease on my fingers and just put it on that O-ring as well. I'm going to go ahead and proceed to put the cap on lightly, just a couple turns. And the next step is going to go ahead and get the shaft with the piston on it. I will put a little bit of grease on the end of it so that way the threads will not tear up the X-rings as we insert it. You can insert it through the top. Once you go ahead and you insert it, I just use the back of my brush to push it in. We can proceed to tighten the cap. And that'll be the completion of putting the bottom of the shock body together. Prior to filling it with oil, we can go ahead and put the top O-ring for the cap, which is our brand new O-ring here. Always good to replace them so that way you don't go ahead and get any leaks from the caps or from the bottom of the reservoir. So prior to filling up the shock reservoir, you're going to want to go ahead and put the shock end on. I'm just going to get it started by hand. If you do not have a pair of pliers that have a smooth end on them, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use a rag to be able to grab the bottom of the shock shaft. For my instance, mine have an end that has no teeth on it. It's a smooth end, so I can go ahead and do this because it does not mark my shock shaft. If you do not have them, make sure and use the rag, because if you do mark this shock shaft, what's going to happen is as your shock compresses and goes in and out, you're going to go ahead and eat up your O-rings, and once you eat up those rings, you're going to start getting the shock to leak. So it's very important that this thing stays intact with no marks on it, period. And as you can see, it's got no marks on it and it's nice and smooth. What we're going to go ahead and do is proceed to fill our shock reservoir up. In this case, we use factory team 80 weight, and this is for the rear. When filling the shock up, you're going to want to go ahead and put the piston up and down in here. And by doing that, it's going to release any air that's trapped at the bottom of the piston. And we want to get that air to the surface, because as we get the air to the surface, as you can see the little bubbles I hope right there in the screen, what's going to happen is those bubbles are going to travel to the surface of the shock reservoir. They're going to pop and have all oil in here with no air in it, period. And that's going to help us to try to get rid of the rebound in the shock. When it comes to drag racing, the least amount of rebound in the shock is going to be better. We want to go ahead and tune our shocks when it comes to the shock with no rebound at all, and do it all through the springs and the adjustment and the shims in the shock. We're going to go ahead and place this in our little table here and allow the air to come to the surface for a good 5 minutes. Now that we've allowed the shock to sit here for a good 5 minutes and allowed all the air to come to the top of the oil, we're going to go ahead and proceed to put the cap on and bleed it. As you can see, we've already installed our cap O-ring. So we're going to go ahead and install the cap. Prior to snugging the cap all the way down, I'll leave it to where it barely starts to grab. And what I like to do is I'll go ahead and I'll compress the shaft. What that's doing is pushing our piston toward the top. You might get a little bit of oil and some air coming out the top. I like to wipe it off. And that's going to help us to get all the air that we can out of this cylinder. So when building your shocks, you want to make sure that your front and your rear shocks always have the same amount of rebound. your both pairs for the back, your both pairs for the fronts have to have the same amount of rebound. The least amount of rebound, the better. But if you're gonna have any rebound in your shock, make sure that they're both rebound the same amount, and that's gonna help you keeping the car to go straight. And now that the shocks have been rebuilt and bled, let's go ahead and put them back together. And there you go.